Hey guys, tonight we begin with something a little darker. A world of ice, axes, and absolutely no indoor heating. We're diving into what it was really like to survive a Viking winter. Not as a king, not as a legendary shield maiden, but as you. A normal person dropped into the unforgiving chill of 9th century Scandinavia. Forget the horned helmets and glorious raids Hollywood sold you. The truth is, the cold alone would probably break you before the first snowflake settled on your unwashed tunic. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Congratulations, you've just woken up in the middle of a Viking winter. The good news, you're not dead yet. The bad news, the sun won't be rising for another 3 hours, and even when it does, it's going to hang low on the horizon like a pale, judgmental eye before disappearing again in the early afternoon. Your bed is a wooden platform covered in straw and animal furs that smell faintly of goat, damp earth, and existential dread. You're inside a longhouse, a single, enormous room you share with 30 other people, a handful of livestock that were brought inside to keep from freezing, and a legion of parasites that see you as a walking buffet. The air is thick, a heavy blanket of wood smoke from the central fire pit, human breath, animal flatulence, and the lingering aroma of last night's boiled fish. There are no windows, just a few small slits in the walls to let out some of the smoke. But mostly, they just let in the bone-chilling draft that feels like a ghost trying to steal your soul. You blink in the near-total darkness, the only light coming from the dying embers of the hearth. You can hear everything. Your neighbor coughing a wet, rattling cough that doesn't sound promising. A baby crying softly in the corner. A cow shifting its weight. And the endless, oppressive howl of the wind outside. This isn't cozy cabin life. This is a survival pod made of timber and mud, and everyone inside is running on fumes. You try to stretch, but the cold bites at your exposed skin instantly. You're wearing a single wool tunic that you've probably had on for a week straight, and it's doing a terrible job. The floor is packed earth, cold and unforgiving. Your first thought isn't about philosophy or ambition. It's about whether you have the willpower to crawl out from under your flea-bitten furs to relieve yourself. And you'll have to do it outside, in the snow, while hoping a wolf doesn't mistake you for an easy meal. This is your reality now. Not a glorious saga, but a long, dark, cold wait for a sun that seems to have forgotten you exist. And this is just the first 5 minutes. It only gets colder from here. You've decided to brave the icy floor of the longhouse, the first major victory of your day. Now for the second challenge. Nature calls. And in a Viking winter, nature calls with a cruel, mocking laugh. There is no bathroom, there's no toilet. There's not even a designated bucket in the corner that offers the illusion of civility. Your only option is the great, frozen outdoors. You pull on your leather shoes, which are stiff with cold, and probably stuffed with straw for a bit of extra insulation, and wrap your wool cloak tightly around you. The moment you push aside the heavy hide flap that serves as a door, the cold hits you like a physical blow. It It's not just chilly, it's a deep, penetrating cold that seems to suck the air from your lungs and freeze the moisture in your nostrils. The snow is deep, the wind is relentless, and the world is a monochrome nightmare of white and grey. You trudge a few feet away from the longhouse, far enough for a sliver of privacy, but close enough that you can still find your way back in the pre-dawn gloom. You find a spot behind a snowdrift. Do your business as quickly as humanly possible, and try not to think about the fact that your bare skin is exposed to temperatures well below freezing. Frostbite is not a medical term here. It's just what happens. There's no toilet paper, of course. You use a handful of snow, which is both shockingly cold and surprisingly ineffective. Then you scramble back to the longhouse, your teeth chattering, your fingers numb, and your dignity left somewhere out in the frozen wasteland. Back inside, hygiene doesn't get much better. Washing your hands means dipping them in a wooden basin of frigid, murky water that was probably hauled from the river yesterday and now has a thin layer of ice on top. Soap, if you have it, is a harsh, lye-based concoction that smells like rendered animal fat, because that's exactly what it is. Most people just skip it. Your teeth. You might chew on a frayed twig to scrape off the worst of the grime, but that's it. There's no minty freshness, just the lingering taste of wood and yesterday's fish. And your body odour. Everyone smells the same. A rich symphony of wood smoke, sweat, unwashed wool, and a faint hint of despair. Deodorant is a concept that won't be invented for another 1,000 years. In this world, you don't fight body odour. You just contribute to the communal aroma. You've answered nature's call. You've performed a mockery of personal hygiene. And you're now ready to face the day feeling only slightly less disgusting than when you woke up. But don't worry, breakfast is next, and it promises to be just as underwhelming. You've faced the cold, the dark, and the grim reality of Viking-era plumbing. Surely a warm, hearty breakfast awaits to reward your courage, right? Wrong. So, very wrong. Breakfast in a Viking longhouse during winter is not a feast. It's a calculated distribution of calories designed to keep you from dying for another few hours. Forget your modern fantasies of sizzling bacon, eggs, or warm pastries. Your meal is a bowl of something grey and lumpy. Welcome to your daily ration of porridge. This isn't the creamy, cinnamon-dusted oatmeal you might be imagining. This is a thick, gloopy stew made from whatever grain was left over from the autumn harvest. Usually barley or oats, boiled with water, or, if you're lucky, a bit of milk from the cow sleeping 10 feet away from you. It has been simmering in a large cauldron over the central fire pit for hours, possibly since last night. The flavour is best described as earthy, with strong notes of smoke and the subtle metallic tang of the pot it was cooked in. There's no sugar, no honey, no fruit to sweeten it. Those are precious commodities saved for feasts or offerings to the gods. You get a scoop of this grainy cement in a wooden bowl and you eat it with a wooden spoon, trying not to think too hard about what else might have fallen into the pot overnight. On the side, you might get a piece of bread. It's a dense, heavy loaf of rye or barley bread, hard as a rock and perfect for sharpening an axe on. It's not sliced. It's hacked off a larger loaf with a knife and tastes faintly of sawdust. To wash it all down, you have two options: water or ale. The water is ice cold, hauled from a nearby river or well, and has to be thawed by the fire. The ale is weak, sour, and lukewarm, but it's a source of calories and is generally safer to drink than water that might be contaminated. Even the children drink it. It's less of a beverage and more of a liquid carbohydrate. What about protein? Maybe, just maybe, you'll get a sliver of dried, salted fish to chew on. Its flavour so intense, it makes your eyes water. Or perhaps a chunk of cheese so hard, it could be used as a whetstone. Fresh meat is a distant memory from the autumn slaughter. For now, you survive on what has been preserved, smoked, salted, or dried. You eat quickly, huddled near the fire, because the moment you step away, the cold will seep back into your bones. Your meal isn't enjoyed, it's consumed. It's fuel for a body that's in a constant battle against the cold and the gnawing emptiness in your stomach. And now that you're full of grey mush, it's time to figure out what to do for the next 12 hours of suffocating darkness. Now that you've finished your bowl of smoky grain paste, you might be wondering what's on the agenda for the day. A glorious raid. A journey to a distant land. Nope. It's winter. You're not going anywhere. The seas are frozen or treacherous. The roads are buried under snow. And the world outside your longhouse is a hostile, barren wasteland. Welcome to the Viking version of cabin fever. Only the cabin is a dark, smoky room filled with 30 increasingly irritable people and a goat that keeps trying to eat your tunic. Your job for the next few months is simple. Survive the boredom without getting murdered by your neighbour. The men spend their days mending tools. An axe head needs re-fastening. A shield needs its leather rim repaired. A fishing net has a tear. It's slow, meticulous work done in the dim, flickering light of the fire. You sit on a wooden stool, your fingers stiff with cold, trying to carve a new handle for a knife or sharpen a spear tip. The air is filled with the sounds of scraping metal, splintering wood, and the low murmur of conversation. The women have their own set of endless tasks. They're in charge of the loom, weaving wool into cloth for new tunics and cloaks. The rhythmic clatter of the loom is a constant backdrop to longhouse life. They also spin yarn, mend clothes, prepare the meagre meals, and care for the children, all while trying to keep the fire from going out, because if the fire dies, everyone dies. It's a heavy responsibility, and it never ends. But there's only so much mending and weaving one can do. The real challenge of a Viking winter is enduring the mind-numbing monotony and the crushing darkness. With only a few hours of weak daylight, most of your life is lived in the gloom. This is where storytelling becomes a survival tool. As the darkness deepens, someone will begin to speak. An old skald, a travelling storyteller, or just a grandfather with a good memory will start to recite the sagas. Tales of gods and giants, of heroes and monsters, of epic battles and voyages to unknown lands. You listen, captivated, as the stories of Odin, Thor and Loki fill the smoky air. These aren't just fairy tales. They are your history, your religion, and your entertainment all rolled into one. They remind you of a world beyond this cold, dark room. A world of adventure and glory that will return with the sun. You might also play games. Nefatafel, a strategic board game similar to chess, is a popular way to pass the hours. Or you might engage in a bit of friendly wrestling, a way to stay warm and burn off some of the pent-up aggression. But even with stories and games, tensions run high. You're trapped in close quarters with the same people, day in and day out. Old grudges simmer, new arguments flare up over trivial things. A stolen piece of bread, an unpaid debt, a perceived insult. A wrong word can lead to a fight, and a fight can lead to a blood feud that lasts for generations. Your survival depends not just on staying warm, but on navigating the complex social web of the longhouse. You learn to keep your opinions to yourself, to share what little you have, and to never, ever look at your neighbor's wife for too long. Let's talk about what you're wearing, because in a Viking winter, your clothes are the only thing standing between you and a very cold, very permanent nap. Fashion is not a concept. Function is everything. And the function is simple. Don't freeze to death. Your entire wardrobe is likely made of one material: wool. Lots and lots of wool. You wear a long-sleeved wool tunic as your base layer, probably itchy, probably stained, and definitely smelling of wood smoke and old sweat. Over that, you have another thicker wool tunic or a heavy wool cloak, fastened at the shoulder with a simple pin made of bone or bronze. This isn't the soft merino wool of modern outdoor gear. This is coarse, heavy, and oily. The natural lanolin in the wool helps to repel water, which is crucial, but it also gives it a distinct, sheepy aroma that follows you everywhere. There is no such thing as a waterproof jacket. If you get wet, you stay wet, and that can be a death sentence. Underneath it all, you might have linen undergarments if you're relatively well off, but many people just go commando under their wool. The constant friction and scratchiness are just part of life. You get used to the itching, or you go mad. On your legs, you wear simple wool trousers, tied at the waist with a leather belt. Your shoes are made of leather, stitched together with sinew. They are not insulated. To keep your feet warm, you stuff them with straw, dried grass, or scraps of felt. It's lumpy and uncomfortable, but it's better than losing your toes to frostbite. You might also have wool socks or leg wraps to keep the snow out of your boots. Gloves or mittens are a luxury, usually made from fur or thick felt. Most of the time, you just tuck your hands into your armpits and hope for the best. And what about when your clothes get dirty? You don't have a washing machine. You might try to brush off the worst of the dirt or spot clean with a damp rag. But a full wash is a rare and difficult event in the dead of winter. It means hauling and heating water, a precious resource, and then waiting for your heavy, wet woolens to dry in a smoky longhouse, a process that could take days. So for the most part, you just keep wearing them. The layers of grime, sweat, and smoke become a part of the garment, adding to its unique character and scent. You are a walking, breathing testament to the power of wool. It keeps you alive, but it also ensures you are never truly comfortable, never truly clean, and always, always a little bit itchy. Surviving the physical hardships of a Viking winter is one thing, but surviving the psychological toll is another battle entirely. The most formidable enemy you face is not the cold, but the darkness. In the heart of a Scandinavian winter, the sun is a fleeting visitor. For months, you live in a world of near perpetual twilight. The days are short, maybe only 4 or 5 hours long, and the light is weak and pale. The rest of the time, you are enveloped in a profound, suffocating darkness, broken only by the flickering light of the hearth fire or the dim glow of an oil lamp. This isn't just an inconvenience, it's a fundamental assault on your senses and your spirit. Your body's natural rhythms are thrown into chaos. It's hard to know when to wake, when to work, when to sleep. Your world shrinks to the small circle of light cast by the fire. Beyond that lies a sea of shadows, filled with the groans of the longhouse, the whispers of your neighbours, and the imagined shapes of things that lurk in the gloom. The lack of sunlight affects your mood, your energy, and your health. Seasonal affective disorder isn't a modern diagnosis. It's a timeless human experience. You feel a deep, gnawing weariness, a sense of hopelessness that the light will never return. The vibrant greens and blues of summer are a distant memory, replaced by the endless monochrome of snow and shadow. To combat this, the Vikings turned to fire and stories. The central hearth was the heart of the longhouse, a source of warmth, light, and community. People gathered around it not just to eat, but to feel connected, to share in its life-giving glow. It was a bulwark against the oppressive darkness outside, and in the flickering light of that fire, the skalds would weave their tales. The sagas were more than just entertainment. They were a form of psychological survival. They transported you to a world of light and action, of sun-drenched fjords and glorious battles. They reminded you that this darkness was temporary, that heroes had faced worse and triumphed. The stories of Thor's hammer-smashing giants and Odin's quest for knowledge were a promise that strength, courage, and wisdom could overcome even the bleakest of winters. Festivals also played a crucial role. Yule, the midwinter festival, was a defiant celebration in the face of the longest night. Great bonfires were lit, feasts were held, and ale was drunk. It was a way of shouting into the darkness, "We are still here, we are still alive, and we know the sun will return." But even with fire, stories, and festivals, the darkness takes its toll. It seeps into your bones, quiets your spirit, and makes the world feel small and frightening. Surviving a Viking winter means learning to live with the shadows, both outside and within. It means finding your own inner fire and keeping it burning, even when the world around you has gone completely dark. In the cramped, smoky confines of the winter longhouse, you are never truly alone. But this constant proximity is a double-edged sword. While community provides warmth and security, it also breeds tension, conflict, and a unique set of social dangers that can be just as deadly as the cold. Let's be clear, there is no personal space. You eat, sleep, and work within arm's length of your neighbours, their children, and their livestock. You know their habits, their secrets, and their arguments intimately, and they know yours. This lack of privacy means that every action is scrutinised, every word is overheard, and every perceived slight is noted. Grudges don't fade away. They fester in the gloom. Did your neighbour take a slightly larger piece of bread at breakfast? Did his goat wander over and eat the straw from your bedding? Did he fail to repay a debt from last summer? These are not trivial matters. In a world where resources are scarce and honour is everything, these small insults can quickly escalate into full-blown conflicts. There is no police force to call, no court system to mediate disputes. Justice in the Viking Age is a personal and often violent affair. If you feel you have been wronged, you are expected to seek restitution yourself. This might start with a formal challenge or a demand for compensation, but it can easily end in a duel. An argument over a stolen sheep can lead to two men facing each other with axes in the snow, with the community watching to see who is stronger, and therefore, who is right. The concept of a blood feud is very real. If you kill a man, even in a fair fight, his family is honour-bound to seek revenge. This can trigger a cycle of violence that lasts for generations, tearing families and communities apart. The longhouse, meant to be a sanctuary from the winter, can become a pressure cooker of simmering feuds and paranoia. You learn to choose your words carefully, to avoid giving offense, and to be wary of those who seem too friendly or too quiet. Your reputation is your most valuable asset. Are you known as a generous and reliable neighbor, or as a greedy and untrustworthy one? Your answer to that question could determine whether someone shares their food with you when supplies run low, or whether they turn a blind eye when a rival comes looking for you in the night. And then there's the ever-present threat of the outsider. A stranger arriving at the longhouse in the middle of winter is a source of both excitement and suspicion. They bring news from the outside world, but they could also be a raider, a thief, or someone fleeing from a feud. Hospitality is a sacred duty, but so is protecting your own. The Viking world is governed by a complex web of loyalty, honor, and fear. Surviving the winter means mastering this social landscape as skillfully as you master an axe. You must be strong, but not aggressive, generous, but not foolish, and always, always aware of who is sitting next to you by the fire. Because in the long, dark nights of a Viking winter, the greatest danger might not be the cold outside, but the person sleeping beside you. You've made it through the long, dark winter. The snows are melting, the days are getting longer, and the first green shoots are beginning to poke through the frozen earth. You feel a sense of relief so profound, it's almost painful. You survived. But don't get too comfortable, because spring in the Viking Age doesn't mean peaceful picnics and blooming flowers. It means it's time to go raiding. The same men you spent the winter huddled with, mending tools and telling stories, are now sharpening their axes, checking their shields, and looking out at the newly thawed sea with a predatory gleam in their eyes. The longship, which has been sheltered all winter, is being prepared. Its dragon-headed prow is being repainted, its sail is being mended, and its hull is being coated with tar. The air is filled with a new kind of energy, not the quiet endurance of winter, but the restless, aggressive hum of anticipation. For many Viking men, raiding wasn't just about plunder. It was a rite of passage, a way to gain wealth, honor, and a reputation that would be sung about in sagas for generations to come. Staying home was safe, but it was also boring. The real world, the world of adventure and glory, was out there, across the sea. If you are a young man, you are expected to go. Refusing could be seen as cowardice. You gather your meager gear, a spear, an axe, a shield, and maybe a helmet if your family is wealthy. You say goodbye to your family, not knowing if you'll ever see them again. You board the longship, a narrow, open-decked vessel packed with dozens of other warriors, a few barrels of water and dried food, and a whole lot of testosterone. The journey itself is a brutal ordeal. There is no shelter on the ship. You are exposed to the wind, the rain, and the constant bone-chilling sea spray. You sleep on the hard wooden planks, huddled together for warmth. The waves crash over the sides, soaking you to the bone. Seasickness is rampant. But you endure it, because the prize is worth it. Your target could be a monastery in England, a coastal village in Francia, or a trading town in the Baltic. You are not looking for a fair fight. You are looking for a swift, brutal, and profitable attack. You arrive at dawn, your longship appearing out of the mist like a sea serpent. You storm ashore screaming your war cries, your axes and swords flashing in the early morning light. You are not an army of liberation. You are a force of terror. You kill, you burn, and you take gold, silver, weapons, livestock, and people. Slavery is a major part of the Viking economy, and the people you capture will be sold in markets from Dublin to Constantinople. The raid is over as quickly as it began. You load your loot and your captives onto the longship and disappear back into the sea, leaving behind a trail of smoke, blood, and devastation. If you survive, you return home a hero, your share of the plunder making you a wealthy and respected man. If you die, you hope you died bravely, so that the Valkyries will carry you to Valhalla to feast with Odin. This is the cycle of Viking life, the grim survival of winter followed by the violent ambition of summer. One is a battle against nature, the other a battle against man. And you, a product of this world, are expected to be master of both. But the Viking world wasn't just about grim survival and brutal raids. It was also a world of legendary ambition, of warriors who sailed into the unknown and carved their names into history. These were not simple barbarians. They were explorers, politicians, and visionaries who reshaped the map of Europe. And few names were carved with more steel and fire than that of Harald Sigurdsson, the man who would become known as Horde, the Hard Ruler. He is often called the last Viking, a figure who stood at the crossroads of the Saga Age and the dawn of medieval Europe. His life was a sprawling epic of exile, warfare, and relentless ambition that took him from the frozen north to the glittering heart of the Byzantine Empire and back again. His story is not just a tale of a single man, it is the story of the Viking spirit in its final, most spectacular blaze of glory. Before he was Hardredr, he was just Harald, a Norwegian prince with a royal bloodline but a dim future. Born around 1015, he was the younger half-brother of King Olaf II of Norway. In a world governed by primogeniture, being the younger brother meant you were destined for the background. But Harald was not a man built for the shadows. His first taste of the world's cruelty came when he was just 15 years old. In 1030, he fought alongside his brother Olaf at the Battle of Stiklestad, a desperate attempt to reclaim the Norwegian throne from the Danish king, Knut the Great. The battle was a disaster. Olaf was killed, his army was crushed, and the young Harald, badly wounded, was forced to flee for his life. He became an exile, a landless prince with a price on his head and nothing to his name but a fierce intelligence and an unquenchable thirst for power and revenge. While a lesser man might have faded into obscurity, Harald saw his exile not as an end, but as an opportunity. He made his way east, across the snows of Sweden and into the vast sprawling lands of the Kievan Rus. There, in the bustling court of Grand Prince Yaroslav the Wise, the young Viking prince began his transformation. He was no longer a boy, he was a survivor, and he was learning. He served in Yaroslav's army, fighting against Poles, Pechenegs, and other enemies of the Rus. He learned the art of large-scale warfare, of strategy and logistics, of how to command men from different cultures and backgrounds. He was no longer just a Norwegian warrior. He was becoming a professional soldier, a mercenary captain in the making. In Kyiv, he rose quickly through the ranks, his skill in battle and his natural charisma earning him the respect of Yaroslav and his men. He was no longer a desperate exile. He was a commander, a man of status. But Kyiv, for all its wealth and power, was not the end of his journey. It was merely a stepping stone. Harold heard tales of an even greater city, a place of unimaginable wealth and power, the heart of the known world, Constantinople, or as the Vikings called it, Miklagard, the great city. And so, with a small band of loyal followers, he set out once more, this time heading south, toward the glittering prize that would define his legend. Harold and his contingent of Norsemen arrived in Constantinople around 1034, and the city must have felt like a different world. This wasn't a land of wooden longhouses and smoky hearths. This was the capital of the Byzantine Empire, a sprawling metropolis of marble palaces, golden domed churches, and teeming markets. It was the wealthiest and most sophisticated city in Christendom, and at its heart was the most elite mercenary unit in the world, the Varangian Guard. This was no ordinary army. The Varangians were the personal bodyguards of the Byzantine emperor, famed for their loyalty, their ferocity, and their massive two-handed axes. Composed primarily of Vikings and Rus, they were a force of nature, and Harold, with his royal blood and proven military prowess, was a perfect fit. He enlisted immediately, and his rise was nothing short of meteoric. He wasn't just another northern brute. He was a brilliant tactician, a charismatic leader, and utterly ruthless. The Byzantine emperors recognized his talent and gave him command. For the next decade, Harold and his Varangians fought on nearly every front of the empire's vast and turbulent borders. He campaigned in Sicily against the Arabs, battling in the heat and dust of the Mediterranean. He fought in Bulgaria, crushing rebellions in the rugged Balkan mountains. He journeyed to the Holy Land, protecting pilgrims and securing Byzantine interests in Jerusalem. He was not just a bodyguard, he was the emperor's enforcer, a problem solver who used his axe to make diplomacy happen. During these years, Harold was not only earning a reputation, he was amassing a colossal fortune. The Varangians were paid handsomely, but Harold also took his share of plunder from every campaign. The sagas claim he sent his vast wealth north for safekeeping with his old patron, Yaroslav the Wise, in Kiev, shipping chests of gold, silver, and precious jewels back along the river routes. He became fantastically wealthy, a Viking prince who had turned his exile into a gold mine. But life in the Byzantine court was as dangerous as any battlefield. It was a snake pit of intrigue, plots, and shifting allegiances. Harold, the powerful and popular foreign general, inevitably made enemies. He became entangled in the complex and often scandalous politics of the imperial family, particularly with the powerful Empress Zoe. His success bred jealousy, and his independent spirit bred suspicion. The man who had survived countless battles would soon face his greatest threat, not from a sword, but from a whisper in the emperor's ear. Harold's time in Constantinople was a masterclass in power, wealth, and survival, but the very success that made him a legend also made him a target. By the early 1040s, the political situation in the Byzantine court had grown treacherous. The reigning emperor, Michael V, grew wary of the powerful and fabulously wealthy Varangian commander. Harold was accused of various crimes, including misappropriating imperial treasure and, according to some saga accounts, even a scandalous affair with Empress Zoe. Whether the charges were true or politically motivated, the result was the same. Harold was arrested and thrown into a dungeon. For the man who had commanded armies and faced down enemies across the empire, imprisonment was the ultimate humiliation. But Harold Hardrada was not a man to wait for his fate to be decided by others. His escape from Constantinople is the stuff of high adventure, a story that blurs the line between history and saga. According to the legends, with the help of loyal Varangians, he broke out of his prison. In a stunning act of defiance, he and his men allegedly stormed the palace, captured the emperor, and blinded him, a common Byzantine method for rendering a rival unfit to rule. It was a brutal, audacious act of revenge. Then, with the city in chaos, Harold made his way to the Golden Horn, the city's great harbour. But the massive chain that blocked the harbour entrance stood in his way. In a stroke of tactical genius, Harold ordered his men to move to the back of their ships, causing the prows to lift out of the water. They rowed with all their might, and as the ship slid over the chain, he commanded everyone to rush to the front. The sudden shift in weight brought the ships crashing down on the other side, free to sail into the open sea. He had not just escaped. He had done so with theatrical flair, leaving the world's greatest city in his wake, humiliated and outsmarted. He sailed across the Black Sea and back to his old allies in Kievan Rus. There, he was reunited with the immense fortune he had sent for safekeeping. He was no longer a landless exile or a mercenary captain. He was a king in all but name, with a treasure chest large enough to buy an army and a reputation fearsome enough to make kings tremble. His decade of service and suffering was over. It was time to go home. He married Yaroslav's daughter, Elizabeth, sealing his alliance with the powerful Rus's prince, and set his sights on the one prize that had eluded him for so long, the crown of Norway. In 1045, Harold Sigurdsson, now a man in his early 30s, returned to the north. He was not the wounded teenage exile who had fled Stiklestad 15 years earlier. He was a seasoned commander, a political operator, and one of the wealthiest men in the world, and he had come to claim his birthright. Norway was currently ruled by his nephew, Magnus the Good, the son of his half-brother Olaf. Magnus was a popular and effective king, but Harald had no intention of waiting for him to die of old age. Power in the Viking world was not inherited peacefully. It was taken. Harald's return sent shockwaves through the Scandinavian political landscape. He didn't come alone. He came with a formidable force of battle-hardened Varangians and the backing of his immense fortune. He was a threat, and everyone knew it. His first move was a masterpiece of political chess. Instead of immediately attacking Norway, he forged an alliance with Svein Estridsson, the king of Denmark and Magnus's chief rival. Together, they began raiding the Danish coast, a direct challenge to Magnus's authority. Harold was using the classic Viking playbook: apply pressure, disrupt trade, and demonstrate that the current king could not protect his own domains. Magnus was caught in a bind. Facing a war on two fronts against his own uncle and the King of Denmark was a daunting prospect. His advisors, recognizing Harold's power and the legitimacy of his claim, urged Magnus to negotiate. A civil war would be devastating for Norway, and Harold was not an enemy to be taken lightly. In 1046, the two met. An agreement was struck, a compromise born of mutual respect and the threat of mutual destruction. Harold would become co-ruler of Norway, sharing the throne with his nephew. In return, Harold would share his legendary Byzantine treasure with Magnus, effectively replenishing the Norwegian royal coffers. It was a tense and fragile alliance. The two kings were polar opposites. Magnus, the pious and just ruler. Harold, the worldly, ruthless and ambitious warrior. The sagas tell of a strained co-reign, with Harold constantly testing Magnus's authority and Magnus trying to maintain peace. But fate intervened before their rivalry could erupt into open conflict. Just a year later, in 1047, Magnus the Good died, either from illness or an accident. On his deathbed, he reportedly declared that Harold would be his sole heir in Norway. At last, after a lifetime of exile, battle, and scheming, Harold Sigurdsson was the undisputed King of Norway. He had returned from the edge of the world to claim his crown. Now, he would earn the name that history would remember him by: Hardredr, the Hard Ruler. Harold's reign as King of Norway was as turbulent and unforgiving as his own life had been. He ruled for nearly 2 decades, from 1047 to 1066, and in that time he transformed Norway, crushing his enemies and centralizing power with an iron fist. He was not a king who ruled by consensus, he ruled by command. His nickname, Hardredr, or Hard Ruler, was not an insult. It was a statement of fact, and one he likely cultivated himself. His first priority was to eliminate any internal opposition. He ruthlessly suppressed the powerful regional chieftains, who had grown accustomed to a high degree of autonomy. He used his vast wealth to build a strong, loyal army, and did not hesitate to use it against his own people if they defied him. Taxes were collected with brutal efficiency, and dissent was met with swift and often lethal punishment. He was a builder and a modernizer, but his methods were those of a Viking warlord. He established a new trading hub, which would eventually become the city of Oslo. He introduced a new silver coinage, a stable currency that boosted the Norwegian economy. He also strengthened the church, building new cathedrals and supporting the clergy, recognizing that religion could be a powerful tool for unifying his kingdom. But peace was not in his nature. For most of his reign, he was embroiled in a long and costly war with his former ally, Svein Estridsson of Denmark. Harold believed he had a claim to the Danish throne as well, and he launched raid after raid on the Danish coast, year after year. The war drained his treasury and cost countless lives, but Harold was relentless. He was a king forged in conflict, and he seemed most comfortable when he was at war. He was also a man of deep contradictions. He was a devout Christian who built churches, yet he consulted seers and believed in the Old Norse omens. He was a patron of the arts, particularly of skaldic poetry, and his court was filled with poets who sang of his deeds. Yet he could order the execution of his enemies without a flicker of emotion. He was, in many ways, a man caught between two worlds, the fading world of the Viking sagas and the emerging world of medieval European kingship. He was a warrior, a poet, a tyrant, and a visionary, all at once. For 19 years he held Norway in his grip, a kingdom forged in his own image, tough, ambitious, and unforgiving. But for a man like Harold, one kingdom was never going to be enough. He had one last great gamble to make, one final roll of the dice for the ultimate prize. In January of 1066, an event occurred that would change the course of European history and set in motion Harald Hardredr's final, fatal adventure. Edward the Confessor, the childless King of England, died. His death created a power vacuum, and 3 men, each with a plausible but contested claim, prepared to fight for the English crown. The first was Harold Godwinson, the most powerful earl in England, who was elected king by the English council, the Witenagemot. The second was William, Duke of Normandy, a distant cousin of the late king, who claimed Edward had promised him the throne. And the third, the wild card from the north, was Harold Hardrada of Norway. Harold's claim was the most tenuous, based on a half-forgotten agreement between his predecessor and a previous Danish king of England. But to Harold, the legitimacy of the claim was less important than the opportunity it presented. England was a rich and powerful kingdom, and the idea of conquering it was a fitting final chapter for his epic life. He wasn't alone in his ambition. He was encouraged and joined by Tostig Godwinson, the disgruntled and exiled brother of the new English king, Harold. Tostig, seeking revenge and power, sailed to Norway and convinced Hardrada that England was ripe for the taking. He promised that many northern English lords would support their cause. It was the last push Harold needed. He began to assemble a massive invasion fleet, one of the largest ever to set sail from Scandinavia. Over 200 longships, carrying an army of thousands of warriors, gathered in the fjords of Norway. It was a monumental undertaking, a gamble that would require all of his wealth, his men, and his luck. The sagas say that as the fleet prepared to depart, there were dark omens. Soldiers had visions of ravens and wolves feasting on corpses, and Harold himself reportedly had a dream of a giant troll woman prophesying his doom. But Harold was not a man to be swayed by portents. He had spent his life defying fate. He boarded his flagship, the Ormen or Serpent, and gave the order to sail. The great fleet moved out into the North Sea, its dragon-prowed ships cutting through the waves, a river of steel and ambition flowing toward the English coast. The last great Viking invasion had begun. Harold Hardrada's fleet arrived off the coast of northern England in September 1066. They sailed up the Humber and Ouse rivers, a terrifying armada that sent the region into a panic. Alongside Tostig Godwinson, Harold's forces landed and began their march on the city of York, the most important stronghold in the north. The local English earls, Edwin and Morcar, hastily assembled an army to meet the invaders. The two forces clashed on September 20th at the Battle of Fulford Gate, just outside York. The battle was a bloody and decisive victory for the Norwegians. Hardrada's battle-hardened veterans, many of them veterans of his long wars with Denmark, shattered the English shield wall. The local levies were no match for the professional warriors of the Norwegian king. York surrendered, and Harold Hardrada was, for a fleeting moment, the master of northern England. He demanded hostages and tribute from the city, and arranged to have them delivered a few days later at a place called Stamford Bridge, a small river crossing a few miles east of York. After his victory, a sense of overconfidence seems to have settled over the Norwegian army. Believing the main English resistance to be broken, they relaxed. On September 25th, a hot and sunny day, Harold and his men marched to Stamford Bridge to receive the promised hostages. They did not expect a fight. In a fateful decision, they left a significant portion of their army and their armour behind with the ships, which were moored some distance away. They marched in light gear, carrying only their weapons, enjoying the warm weather. But they had made a fatal miscalculation. They had no idea that King Harold Godwinson of England was not in the south, waiting for the Norman invasion, as they had assumed. The English king had heard of the Norwegian landing, and had performed one of the most remarkable forced marches in military history, covering nearly 200 miles in just 4 days. He arrived at Stamford Bridge with his elite army of housecarls, catching the Norwegians completely by surprise. The Vikings, lounging by the river, looked up to see a cloud of dust on the horizon, a cloud that soon resolved itself into the glint of sun on steel, the banners of the English king. The trap had been sprung, but not by them. They were caught, unarmoured, and outnumbered on the wrong side of the river. The sight of the English army appearing over the ridge must have been a heart-stopping shock to the unprepared Norwegians. King Harold Godwinson had achieved total tactical surprise. The battle that followed at Stamford Bridge on September 25, 1066, was one of the most brutal and dramatic in English history. The Norwegians were scattered, and a frantic scramble began to form a defensive line. According to the sagas, the battle for the bridge itself became the stuff of legend. A single, gigantic Norwegian berserker allegedly held the narrow wooden bridge against the entire English army. Wielding a massive two-handed axe, he cut down dozens of Englishmen who tried to cross. He was a force of nature, a terrifying embodiment of Viking fury. He was finally brought down only when an English soldier floated under the bridge in a barrel and thrust a spear up through the planks, striking the berserker from below. The heroics of the lone warrior bought precious time. It allowed Harold Hardrada and Tostig to rally their men on the far side of the river and form a shield wall. By the time the English army crossed the bridge, the Norwegians were ready for them, and a ferocious, day-long battle began. Harold Hardrada, true to his name, was in the thick of the fight. Towering over his men, he fought with a two-handed sword. His battle rage, the Berserker gang, reportedly upon him. He was a whirlwind of destruction, cutting down all who stood in his path. For hours, the battle raged, a bloody stalemate of shield against shield, axe against sword. The Norwegians, despite being unarmoured, fought with the desperate courage of cornered wolves. Reinforcements eventually arrived from the ships, but they were exhausted from a frantic armoured run over many miles and could do little to turn the tide. Then, in the late afternoon, the decisive moment came. As Harold Hardrada led a charge, an English arrow, fired randomly into the melee, struck him in the throat. The great king, the last Viking, fell. His death shattered the Norwegian morale. Tostig Godwinson was also killed, and the shield wall finally broke. The battle turned into a rout. The English pursued the fleeing Norwegians, cutting them down without mercy. Of the more than 200 ships that had arrived in England, only a handful were needed to carry the few survivors home. The great Viking army had been annihilated. The last great Viking invasion was over, and the age of the Vikings, which had begun with raids on the English coast nearly 3 centuries earlier, ended in blood and defeat on a bridge in Yorkshire. The death of Harold Hardrada at Stamford Bridge was more than just the end of a single king's ambition. It was a symbolic turning point in history. He is often called the last of the Vikings, and for good reason. His life embodied the quintessential Viking spirit, the wanderlust, the thirst for wealth and glory, the fusion of warrior and warlord. He was a product of the old world, a man who lived by the code of the sagas, yet his actions had profound consequences for the new world of medieval Europe that was taking shape. The Battle of Stamford Bridge while a stunning victory for King Harold Godwinson of England came at a terrible cost. His army was battered and exhausted, and he had no time to rest. Just 3 days after his victory in the north, he received the news he had been dreading. William of Normandy had landed on the south coast. Harold was forced to march his weary army another 250 miles south to face a fresh and well-equipped Norman force. On October 14th, 1066, less than 3 weeks after Stamford Bridge, the English and Norman armies met at the Battle of Hastings. The English, tired but determined, fought bravely for an entire day, but by nightfall their shield wall was broken, and King Harold Godwinson lay dead on the battlefield. William the Conqueror had won the English throne. It's one of history's great what-ifs. If Harold Hardrada had not invaded, would Harold Godwinson's army have been fresh enough to defeat the Normans? Did the last great Viking raid inadvertently pave the way for the Norman conquest of England? It's impossible to know for sure, but the connection is undeniable. Hardrada's legacy is a complex one. In Norway, he is remembered as a strong, if harsh, king who unified the country and gave it a place on the European stage. In the sagas, he is an epic hero, a larger-than-life figure whose adventures are the stuff of legend. But to history, he is the man who represents the end of an era. The Viking Age, with its longships, its raids, and its restless, expansive energy, died with him on that English battlefield. The Scandinavian world was changing, becoming more integrated into the feudal, Christianized culture of mainland Europe. The age of the roving warlord was over. The age of the settled medieval king had begun. Harold Hardrada was the last great flame of a dying fire, a man who lived a life so extraordinary it feels like fiction. He was an exile, a mercenary, a general, a poet, and a king. He travelled from the frozen fjords of Norway to the sun-drenched shores of Sicily, from the wild steppes of Russia to the sacred streets of Jerusalem. He saw the world, he fought its battles, and he almost conquered it. In the end, he was a Viking to the last, dying as he had lived, with a sword in his hand and a crown in his sights. The world of the Vikings was not solely a domain of men, of bearded warriors and ambitious kings. It was also shaped by the presence of powerful, respected, and sometimes feared women. While their roles were different from those of men, Viking Age women, particularly in Scandinavia, enjoyed a degree of freedom and influence that was rare in much of Europe at the time. Their lives were not lived in the shadows. They were the anchors of the homestead, the keepers of honour, and sometimes the wielders of both political and spiritual power. At the heart of a woman's authority was the household. When the men were away, raiding, trading, or fighting, it was the woman of the house, the husfreyja, who ran the farm, managed the finances, and defended the homestead. She was not a passive bystander. She was the master of the domestic sphere. A symbol of her authority was the set of keys she wore at her belt. Keys to the food stores, the chests of valuables, and the very heart of the family's wealth. She was in charge, and her competence was crucial to the family's survival, especially during the long, harsh winters. Viking women could own property, inherit land, and initiate divorce. If a husband was abusive, neglectful, or simply a poor provider, a woman could legally dissolve the marriage and take her dowry with her. This gave them a level of legal and economic independence that their counterparts in Christian Europe would not see for centuries. They were not property. They were partners in a world that demanded resilience from everyone. While their primary roles were centered on the family and the farm, women also held spiritual authority. Some were known as volur, female seers, or shamanesses, who practiced a form of Norse magic known as cider. These women were both respected and feared. They could foretell the future, cast spells, and communicate with the gods. Even powerful chieftains and kings would seek their counsel. A Völva's prophecy could launch a war or stop one in its tracks. And then there are the shield maidens, the legendary female warriors who fought alongside men. While once thought to be purely the stuff of myth, archaeological evidence has begun to challenge that assumption. Graves containing female skeletons have been discovered buried with a full set of weapons, swords, axes, shields, and arrows. One famous grave in Birka, Sweden, once thought to be that of a high-ranking male warrior, was revealed through DNA analysis to be that of a woman. While it's unlikely that armies of shield maidens were a common sight, it is clear that some women did take up arms, earning respect and renown as warriors. From the fierce Lagerta of the sagas, to the historical women who managed farms and commanded spiritual respect, Viking women were not passive figures. They were strong, pragmatic, and integral to the fabric of their society. They were the weavers of cloth and the weavers of fate, the keepers of the hearth and the keepers of honor. In the Viking worldview, life was a brief, often brutal affair, but death was not the end. It was merely a doorway to another realm, a continuation of existence in one of several otherworldly halls. The Norse afterlife was not a single destination, but a complex landscape shaped by one's actions, social status, and most importantly, the manner of one's death. There was no universal heaven or hell, but a series of fates determined by the gods. The most famous of these destinations was, of course, Valhalla, the Hall of the Slain. This was the glorious, mead-soaked paradise reserved for warriors who died bravely in battle. Presided over by Odin, the All-Father, Valhalla was a colossal hall where the spirits of these chosen warriors, known as the Einherjar, would spend their days fighting and their nights feasting. Every day, they would battle each other on the plains of Asgard, dying and being reborn to fight again. Every evening, their wounds would heal, and they would gather at long tables to drink endless ale and eat the meat of the boar Sehrimnir, who was also resurrected daily. It was an eternal cycle of glorious combat and celebration, a warrior's ultimate reward. But not everyone who died in battle went to Valhalla. The goddess Freyja, the ruler of the realm of Folkvanga, also had her pick of the slain, choosing half of the fallen warriors to reside in her great hall, Sessrumnir. The sagas are less clear on the details of life in Folkvanga, but it was considered an equally honourable fate. But what about those who didn't die in battle? The farmers, the merchants, the women who died in childbirth, the elderly who passed away from sickness. The vast majority of people were destined for hell, or Helheim. Unlike the Christian concept of hell, the Norse hell was not necessarily a place of punishment and fire. It was a cold, misty, and gloomy realm ruled by the goddess of the same name, the daughter of Loki. Hell was a neutral place, a shadowy reflection of the world of the living. It was not a reward or a punishment, but simply the continuation of existence for those who died a straw death, a death in bed. of old age or illness. While not a place of torment, it was certainly not the glorious afterlife of Valhalla. It was a quiet, somber, and uneventful existence. There were other, more obscure destinations as well. Those who drowned at sea were said to be taken by the goddess Ran into her hall beneath the waves. The specifics of the Norse afterlife are often contradictory and have been pieced together from fragmented sources like the Poetic Edda and the Prose Edda. What is clear, however, is that the Vikings had a profound and complex relationship with death. It was not something to be feared, but something to be faced with courage and honor. How you died was as important as how you lived, and the hope of a glorious afterlife in Valhalla fueled the legendary ferocity of the Viking warrior. The Vikings were masters of the sea, but their true power lay in the vessels that carried them across it, the longships. These were not just boats, they were technological marvels, works of art, and the engines of the Viking age. The longship was the key to their success in raiding, trading, and exploration, a perfect fusion of form and function that allowed them to dominate the waterways of Europe for centuries. The genius of the longship was its design. It was long, narrow, and light, with a shallow draft. This meant it could not only survive the treacherous waves of the open North Sea, but could also navigate shallow rivers, allowing the Vikings to strike deep inland, far from coastal defences. A longship could appear seemingly out of nowhere, sail up a river, disgorge its crew of warriors for a raid, and then disappear just as quickly. This element of surprise was a terrifying and devastating tactical advantage. The ships were built using a clinker construction method, where the hull planks overlapped and were fastened with iron rivets. This made the hull both strong and flexible, allowing it to bend and twist with the motion of the waves, rather than breaking. They were propelled by a single, large square sail made of wool, which gave them incredible speed when the wind was right. When the wind failed, or during combat, the sail was lowered, and the ship was powered by oars. A typical longship might have 30 or 40 oars, manned by the warriors themselves. This dual propulsion system gave them unmatched versatility. But longships weren't just practical, they were also symbols of power and status. The prows were often carved into the fearsome shapes of dragons or serpents, designed to intimidate their enemies and protect the crew from sea monsters and evil spirits. These were not just decorations, they were a form of psychological warfare. Imagine being a monk in a coastal monastery, seeing a fleet of these dragon-headed ships appearing out of the morning mist. The terror would have been absolute. There were different types of longships for different purposes. The Snekja was a smaller, faster ship used for raiding and reconnaissance. The Skade was a larger warship, a true dragon ship with a large crew. And the Nar was a wider, deeper vessel, more of a cargo ship used for trade and colonization. It was the Nar that carried Vikings to Iceland, Greenland, and ultimately to North America. The longship was more than just a vehicle. It was the heart of Viking society. It was a community, a weapon, and a home all in one. It carried them to new lands, brought them immense wealth, and became the enduring symbol of their power and their reach. Without the longship, the Viking Age would have never happened. While the sagas and histories are filled with tales of kings and warriors, the spiritual life of the Vikings was often guided by a far more mysterious and powerful figure, the Volva. A Volva was a female seer, a shamaness, a practitioner of the magical art of Seder. She was not a priestess in a formal temple. She was a wanderer, a keeper of ancient knowledge, and a direct conduit to the world of gods, spirits, and fate. In a society that revered destiny, the vulva was the one who could read its threads. A vulva was instantly recognizable. She was often an older woman who traveled from town to town, unattached to any single family or chieftain. She carried a staff, or sidestaffer, often adorned with carvings and charms, which was the symbol of her power. Her clothing was distinctive, sometimes including a blue or black cloak, a headdress made of animal fur, and a belt from which hung a pouch containing her magical tools, herbs, charms, and runes. Her presence was both an honor and a source of deep unease. When a vulva arrived at a settlement, she was treated with the utmost respect. She would be given the high seat in the longhouse, fed the best food, and listened to with rapt attention. People came to her seeking knowledge. Would the harvest be good? Would the upcoming raid be successful? What did the future hold for their children? Her primary ritual was the Seder ceremony. This was a complex and powerful form of magic that involved chanting, drumming, and entering a trance-like state. The vulva would sit on a raised platform, and with the help of a choir of women singing special chants, she would journey into the spirit world. In this state, she could communicate with the gods, summon the spirits of the dead, and see the threads of fate, or weird, that governed all things. What she saw, she would report back in the form of cryptic poetic prophecies. Her pronouncements were not taken lightly. A chieftain might change his battle plans. A farmer might alter his planting schedule. A marriage might be arranged or broken, all based on the word of a vulva. She held immense power, a power that came not from wealth or weapons, but from her connection to the unseen. The most famous depiction of a vulva comes from the Völuspá, or Prophecy of the Seeress, the first poem in the poetic Edda. In it, Odin himself summons a long-dead vulva to learn of the creation of the world and its ultimate doom, Ragnarök, the fact that the All-Father, the greatest of the gods, had to seek knowledge from a vulva speaks volumes about their status. They were not just fortune tellers, they were repositories of the deepest cosmic truths. In a world of brutal physical power, the vulva represented a different kind of strength. The power of spirit, wisdom, and the mysteries that lie just beyond the veil of the mortal world. The Vikings were more than just raiders. They were among the most ambitious and far-reaching traders of their time. From the frozen rivers of the Rus to the bustling markets of the Byzantine Empire, they created a vast and complex network of trade that connected cultures, moved goods, and generated immense wealth. Their ambition was not just to plunder, but to profit. The key to their commercial success was, once again, the longship, particularly the Nar. This wider, deeper cargo ship was the workhorse of Viking trade. It could carry tons of goods, furs, timber, walrus ivory, and slaves across the treacherous North Sea and down the river systems of Eastern Europe. The Vikings established two major trade routes. The first was the Western Way, which connected Scandinavia with the British Isles, Iceland, Greenland, and even North America. They founded bustling trade hubs like Dublin in Ireland and Jorvik, modern-day York, in England. In these towns, they traded goods from the north, furs from Finland, walrus ivory from Greenland, soapstone from Norway, for English silver, French wine, and other European luxuries. The second, and perhaps more important route, was the Eastern Way, which followed the great rivers of Russia, the Volga and the Dnieper, south to the two richest empires of the age, the Byzantine Empire and the Islamic Caliphate. Viking traders, known as the Rus, established fortified settlements along these rivers, which grew into major cities like Novgorod and Kiev. They transported furs, amber, honey, and most lucratively slaves, down to the Black and Caspian seas. In the markets of Constantinople and Baghdad, they traded these northern goods for silk, spices, glassware, and most importantly, silver. The vast quantities of Arabic silver coins, or dirhams, found in Viking hordes all across Scandinavia, are a testament to the scale and profitability of this eastern trade. The Vikings were not just passive merchants. They were also explorers and colonizers who established new settlements to facilitate their trade. They were the original venture capitalists, willing to risk dangerous journeys for the promise of high returns. Their impact was profound. They didn't just move goods, they moved ideas, technologies, and cultures. They were a bridge between the Islamic world, the Byzantine Empire, and Western Europe. While their reputation as fearsome warriors is well deserved, it's equally important to remember them as savvy entrepreneurs, the globe-trotting businessmen of the early Middle Ages, who saw the world not just as a place to conquer, but as a marketplace of endless opportunity. While the image of the axe-wielding warrior dominates our perception of the Vikings, their culture was also rich with artistry, craftsmanship, and a deep appreciation for beauty. They were not just destroyers, they were creators, and their art was a complex, vibrant expression of their worldview, a world teeming with gods, monsters, and the swirling, interconnected patterns of fate. Viking art is instantly recognizable for its intricate interwoven designs. It is an art of animal motifs, of stylized beasts, dragons, serpents, wolves, and birds that writhe and twist in complex ribbon-like patterns. This style, known as gripping beast or animal style, is found on everything from jewelry and weapons to rune stones and the carved prows of their longships. The designs are not just decorative, they are symbolic. The endless, looping knots may represent the interconnectedness of all things, the threads of fate, or the cyclical nature of life and death. The fierce beasts could be protective talismans, meant to ward off evil spirits, or representations of the chaotic, untamed forces of nature. The craftsmanship was extraordinary. Viking metalsmiths were masters of their trade, creating exquisite jewelry from gold, silver, and bronze. They perfected techniques like filigree, delicate wirework, and granulation, fusing tiny beads of metal to a surface. Brooches, arm rings, and necklaces were not just adornments. They were symbols of wealth and status, often given by a chieftain to his loyal followers. Weapons, too, were works of art. Swords were the most prized possessions of a warrior, and the hilts and pommels were often lavishly decorated with inlaid silver, gold, and intricate patterns. A beautifully crafted sword was not just a tool of war, it was a status symbol, an heirloom passed down through generations. Wood carving was another area of artistic mastery. The Oseberg ship, a wonderfully preserved Viking ship burial, is a testament to their skill. Its prow and stern are covered in a breathtaking tapestry of carved, intertwining animals. The level of detail and artistry is astonishing, a clear indication that these ships were meant to be more than just functional vessels. They were floating masterpieces. Even everyday objects, like wooden chests, drinking horns, and combs, were often decorated with care. Viking art was not confined to museums or temples. It was woven into the fabric of daily life. It was a way of making the world around them more beautiful, more meaningful, and more magical. It was a way of taming the chaos of their world by capturing it in intricate, ordered patterns. In the art of the Vikings, we see not just their fears and their gods, but also their deep love of beauty, their respect for craftsmanship, and their profound understanding that even in a harsh and brutal world, there is always room for a touch of elegance. The end of the Viking Age was not a single event, but a slow, gradual transformation that occurred over several centuries. There was no final battle that brought the era to a close. Though Harald Hardrada's defeat at Stamford Bridge in 1066 is often used as a convenient bookend, the decline was a complex process, driven by a combination of political, religious, and social changes that slowly tamed the restless, expansionist spirit of the Norsemen. One of the most significant factors was the rise of centralized monarchies in Scandinavia itself. The very wealth that raiding and trading brought back to Norway, Denmark, and Sweden allowed powerful kings to emerge. These kings began to consolidate their power, build professional armies, and establish more stable, feudal-style kingdoms. The old system of independent chieftains, leading their own raiding parties, was gradually replaced by royal-led, state-sponsored warfare. The age of the freelance Viking adventurer was coming to an end. The conversion to Christianity was another profound force of change. As Scandinavia slowly adopted the new faith, the Old Norse paganism, with its warrior gods and its promise of Valhalla, began to fade. Christianity brought with it a different worldview, one that emphasized peace, stability, and a more structured, hierarchical society. The church discouraged raiding and promoted more civilized forms of interaction with the rest of Europe. While the conversion was a long and often violent process, it fundamentally altered the cultural and moral landscape of the Viking world. The world around them was also changing. The kingdoms of Europe, once vulnerable and disorganized, had grown stronger. They built better castles, fielded larger and more professional armies, and developed more effective defenses against seaborne raids. The easy pickings that had made the early Viking Age so profitable were gone. Raiding became a much riskier and less rewarding enterprise. At the same time, the Vikings were becoming more integrated into the very cultures they had once terrorized. Vikings who settled in England, France, Normandy, and Russia gradually assimilated, adopting the local languages, customs, and religions. They were no longer outsiders. They were becoming part of the European mainstream. By the 11th century, the Viking was no longer a pagan raider from the north. He was a Christian knight, a feudal lord, or a merchant in a bustling European town. The restless energy that had once sent longships across the ocean was now being channeled into building nations, fighting in the Crusades, and participating in the complex politics of medieval Europe. The Viking Age didn't so much end as it evolved. The spirit of the Norsemen was not extinguished. It was simply absorbed into the broader tapestry of European civilization. The dragon ships were replaced by castles, the berserkers by knights. But the legacy of their courage, their artistry, and their unquenchable thirst for the horizon would endure. But the story of the Vikings does not end with the fall of kings or the rise of new religions. It continues in the quiet whispers of discovery. in the echoes of a journey so audacious it feels like a myth. Long before Columbus, long before the age of European exploration, these Norse seafarers pushed the boundaries of the known world, sailing their open-decked longships into the icy, unknown waters of the North Atlantic. Their westward expansion was a multi-generational saga of courage, desperation, and sheer, stubborn resilience. It began in the late 9th century, when Vikings fleeing the centralizing power of King Harald Fairhair of Norway set out in search of new lands. They found Iceland, a rugged volcanic island of fire and ice. It was a harsh and unforgiving land, but it was empty, and it was theirs. They established a new society there, a republic governed by a parliament called the Althing, the oldest of its kind in the world. But Iceland was not the final frontier. In the late 10th century, an Icelandic chieftain named Eric the Red, exiled for manslaughter, set sail even further west. He was following rumours of a new land, and he found it. He called it Greenland, a clever bit of marketing to attract settlers to a land that was mostly ice. He established a small, struggling colony on the southwestern coast, a tiny European outpost clinging to the edge of the Arctic world. And it was from this remote outpost in Greenland that the final, most remarkable chapter of their journey began. Around the year 1000, Eric the Red's son, Leif Erikson, a man with his father's adventurous spirit and a deep curiosity, set sail once more. He was either blown off course on a journey back from Norway or intentionally seeking new lands based on the accounts of another sailor. What he found would rewrite the history of the Americas. He landed on the shores of a new continent, a place of towering forests, wild grapes, and flowing rivers. He called it Vinland, the land of wines. The Vikings had reached North America nearly 500 years before Columbus. Archaeological evidence discovered in the 1960s at L'Anse aux Meadows in Newfoundland, Canada, confirmed the saga accounts. The remains of a small Norse settlement, turf-walled longhouses, a forge, and various artifacts proved that the Vikings had not only landed, but had lived, worked, and built on American soil. Their stay, however, was brief. The settlement lasted only a few years. They were a small band of explorers, thousands of miles from home, in a land already inhabited by indigenous peoples, whom the Norse called Skraelings. The relationship was fraught with conflict and misunderstanding. The Vikings were too few, their supply lines too long, and the local resistance too strong. They eventually abandoned Vinland and sailed back to Greenland, their incredible discovery fading into the mists of oral tradition and the lines of the sagas. It was a fleeting encounter, a brief touch between two worlds, but it remains one of the most astonishing achievements in the history of human exploration. It is the ultimate testament to the Viking spirit, the courage to sail past the edge of the map, to face the unknown, and to leave the first European footprints on a new world. The Vikings did not have a written language in the way we think of it today. They did not have books, scrolls, or libraries filled with literature. Instead, they had runes. These were not just letters of an alphabet. They were powerful symbols, each with a name, a phonetic sound, and a deep mystical meaning. Runes were the language of stone, wood, and bone, a way to record names, commemorate deeds, and perhaps to tap into the magical forces that govern the universe. The runic alphabet is known as the Futhark, named after its first 6 letters, F, U, Thief, A, R, K. The Elder Futhark, the oldest form, consisted of 24 runes, each representing a concept central to the Norse world view. For example, the rune Fehu, F, represented cattle and wealth. Uruz, U, stood for the wild ox and primal strength, and Thurisaz, Th, symbolized the giant Thor and destructive force. To carve a rune was not just to write, it was to invoke the power of the symbol itself. Runes were rarely used for everyday communication or long narratives. That was the domain of the skalds and oral tradition. Instead, runes were used for inscriptions that were meant to be permanent and powerful. They were carved onto memorial stones, known as runestones, to honor the dead and proclaim their achievements. A typical runestone might read, Bjorn, son of Eric, raised this stone in memory of his father, a good man who died in the West. These stones were public monuments, a way of etching a family's legacy into the landscape itself. Runes were also carved onto weapons, swords, axes, and spearheads, to give them strength and accuracy in battle. They were inscribed on amulets and jewelry for protection, luck, or love. And they were used in magic. A master of the runes, or Erilaz, was believed to be able to use them for divination, to cast spells, or to curse an enemy. Odin himself, according to the myths, hung for 9 nights on the world tree, Yggdrasil, wounded and sacrificing himself to himself, in order to gain the wisdom of the runes. This act underscores their sacred importance. Runic knowledge was not given freely. It was earned through suffering and sacrifice. As the Viking Age progressed and Christianity began to take hold, the runic alphabet evolved into the Younger Futhark, a simplified version with only 16 runes. Runic inscriptions began to appear alongside Christian crosses, a fascinating blend of the Old World and the New. But eventually, the Latin alphabet, the language of the Church and of medieval Europe, replaced the Futhark. The runes faded from common use, becoming the stuff of folklore and mystery. Yet, they never truly disappeared. They remain a powerful and enigmatic symbol of the Viking world. A reminder that for the Norsemen, language was not just a tool for communication, it was a key to the sacred. In the smoky, firelit world of the Viking longhouse, where winter nights were long and darkness was a constant companion, there was no form of entertainment more prized than the art of the skald. A skald was more than just a poet. He was a historian, a propagandist, a court entertainer, and a master of language. In a society without widespread literacy, the skald was the keeper of memory, the one who could turn the chaos of battle and the complexities of politics into immortal verse. Skaldic poetry was not the simple, narrative style of the Eddic poems, which told tales of gods and myths. Skaldic verse was a highly complex, technically demanding, and intellectually challenging art form. It was a puzzle box of language designed to flatter a patron, commemorate a victory, or insult a rival with dazzling linguistic flair. A skald's primary tools were 2 complex poetic devices, the kenning and the heiti. A heiti was essentially a poetic synonym, using a mythological name to refer to a common object. For example, a man might be called the Tree of Battle, or a woman the Goddess of Arm Rings. A kenning was even more complex. It was a metaphorical compound phrase used in place of a simple noun. For example, a sword was not a sword. It was a wound serpent or battle icicle. The sea was the whale road. A warrior was a feeder of ravens. Gold was the dragon's horde. A truly skilled skald could layer kennings within kennings, creating a dense, elusive, and intellectually rewarding tapestry of words. The verse also followed incredibly strict metrical rules, with a fixed number of syllables per line and a complex pattern of alliteration and internal rhyme. To compose skaldic poetry on the spot, as many skalds were expected to do, required a prodigious memory and a lightning-fast mind. A good skald was a highly respected and well-rewarded member of a king's or chieftain's court. A powerful lord would keep a skald by his side to compose poems that praised his generosity, his courage in battle, and the glory of his lineage. These poems were a form of propaganda, a way to enhance the king's reputation and ensure his deeds would be remembered long after his death. In return, the skald would be rewarded with gold rings, fine weapons, and a place of honour at the feast table. But the skald's tongue could be as sharp as his patron's sword. A skald could also compose poems of insult or satire, known as nid, which were believed to have magical power and could ruin a man's reputation forever. The power of the skald was the power of words, and in the Viking world, a well-aimed verse could be as deadly as a well-aimed axe. They were the rock stars of their age, the masters of a demanding art form that turned language itself into a weapon, a treasure, and a monument. As the Viking Age drew to its close in the 11th century, a new and devastating force was reshaping the battlefields of Europe: the mounted knight. The combination of a trained warrior on a large warhorse, equipped with a lance, a kite shield, and chainmail, had become the dominant military unit of the medieval period. The old style of infantry-based warfare, the shield wall that had been the cornerstone of both Viking and Anglo-Saxon armies, was becoming obsolete. The Battle of Hastings in 1066 was a brutal illustration of this shift. While the English housecarls fought with incredible bravery, their static shield wall was ultimately broken down by the relentless cycle of Norman cavalry charges and archer volleys. The Viking way of war, which relied on shock, ferocity, and the strength of the individual warrior, was giving way to a new era of disciplined, heavily armoured and mobile cavalry. The Vikings themselves were not oblivious to this change. Those who settled in Normandy had fully embraced the feudal system and had become some of the most feared knights in Europe. But in Scandinavia, the transition was slower. The terrain was less suitable for large-scale cavalry warfare, and the old traditions died hard. The Viking warrior, with his round shield and his axe, was a formidable infantryman, but he was vulnerable to a knight's charge. The world was changing in other ways too. The rise of castles and stone fortifications made the old Viking smash-and-grab raids far more difficult. It was one thing to sack an undefended monastery, but quite another to lay siege to a well-garrisoned stone castle. This required a different kind of warfare, one of siege engines, logistics, and long campaigns, which was at odds with the traditional raiding model. The Viking longship, while still a master of the sea, was also becoming less of a decisive weapon. The naval powers of Europe were building larger, more robust ships, and coastal defences were becoming more sophisticated. The element of surprise, which had been the Vikings' greatest advantage, was being lost. The decline of the Viking as a military force was not due to a loss of courage or skill, but to a failure to adapt to the changing face of medieval warfare. The individualistic, heroic ethos of the saga warrior was no match for the disciplined, collective power of the feudal army. The axe was being replaced by the lance, the shield wall by the cavalry charge, and the longship by the castle. The world had moved on, and the Viking warrior, once the most feared predator in Europe, was becoming a relic of a bygone age. The legacy of the Vikings is a complex and often contradictory one. For centuries, they were remembered primarily as they were depicted by their victims, as savage, bloodthirsty barbarians who descended from the north to burn, pillage, and destroy. The monks who wrote the chronicles of the time saw them as a scourge from God, a punishment for the sins of Christendom. This image of the horned helmeted, a popular myth, they did not wear them. Axe-wielding berserker has persisted in popular culture for 1,000 years. But this is only one side of a much more complicated story. The Vikings were also explorers of unparalleled audacity, who pushed the boundaries of the known world further than any had before. They were the first Europeans to cross the Atlantic and set foot in the Americas, a feat of seamanship and courage that would not be replicated for 5 centuries. They were savvy traders and merchants who created a global network that stretched from Canada to Central Asia, connecting disparate cultures and economies. They were pioneers and colonists who founded new cities and new nations, from Dublin to Kiev, and whose descendants would go on to shape the history of England, France, and Russia. They were also artists and craftsmen of extraordinary skill, who created works of intricate beauty and profound symbolism. They were poets and storytellers who gave the world a rich and powerful mythology, a universe of gods, giants, and heroes that continues to inspire and captivate us today. And they were lawgivers and politicians who created surprisingly sophisticated systems of governance, like the Icelandic Althing, one of the world's first parliaments. In recent decades, our understanding of the Vikings has been transformed by archaeology. The excavation of Viking cities like Jorvik, York, and the discovery of their trade routes and settlements have painted a much more nuanced picture. We now see them not just as warriors, but as farmers, artisans, merchants, and families. We see a society that was complex, dynamic, and far more sophisticated than the old stereotypes would suggest. The Viking legacy, then, is a dual one. They were, without a doubt, a violent and disruptive force, but they were also a creative and transformative one. They were the agents of both destruction and creation, of chaos and connection. They tore down old worlds, but they also built new ones. They are a powerful reminder that history is rarely a simple story of good and evil, but a complex and often messy tapestry woven from the threads of ambition, violence, creativity, and the enduring human desire to see what lies beyond the horizon. The world of the Norse gods is a realm of stark beauty, brutal conflict, and profound, often melancholic, wisdom. It is a pantheon ruled not by a single, all-powerful deity, but by a complex family of gods, the Aesir and the Vanir, who are themselves flawed, mortal, and fated to die. At the head of this family is Odin, the All-Father. He is not a benevolent, fatherly figure like the Christian god. Odin is a restless, enigmatic, and often ruthless deity. He is the god of war, but also of poetry and wisdom. He is a seeker of knowledge, so obsessed with understanding the mysteries of the universe that he sacrificed one of his own eyes for a drink from the well of Mimir, which granted him cosmic insight. He hung himself from Yggdrasil, the world tree, for 9 days and nights, pierced by his own spear, to discover the secrets of the runes. He is a wanderer, a shapeshifter, and a master of magic. But he is also a god of the gallows, a deity who demands sacrifice, both from his followers and from himself. His son Thor is perhaps the most famous of the Norse gods. He is the champion of mankind, the god of thunder, and the sworn enemy of the giants. He is a more straightforward figure than his father, immensely strong, courageous, and possessed of a legendary temper. He wields the mighty hammer Mjolnir, which returns to his hand when thrown, and rides across the sky in a chariot pulled by 2 goats. He is a protector, a force of order against the chaos of the giants, but he is also quick to anger and not known for his subtlety. Then there is Loki, the trickster. He is not one of the Aesir by blood, but a giant who was accepted into their ranks by Odin. He is the god of mischief, chaos, and fire. He is charming, intelligent, and utterly amoral. He is a shapeshifter who can be both a help and a hindrance to the gods. He helps them acquire many of their greatest treasures, like Thor's hammer and Odin's spear, but he is also the architect of their greatest tragedies. It is Loki who orchestrates the death of Balder, the most beloved of the gods, an act that sets in motion the events leading to Ragnarok. The Norse pantheon is filled with other powerful figures. Freya, the goddess of love, beauty, and Seder magic. Freya, her brother, the god of fertility and prosperity. Tyr, the one-handed god of law and heroic glory. And Heimdall, the ever-watchful guardian of the Bifrost Bridge. These are not distant, perfect beings. They are gods who love, hate, bleed, and fear. They know their world is not eternal. They live under the shadow of a prophecy that foretells their own destruction. A final, cataclysmic battle that they will fight and lose. This sense of impending doom gives the Norse myths a unique and tragic power. At the heart of Norse cosmology lies Yggdrasil, the world tree. It is an immense ash tree, the Axis Mundi, whose branches stretch out over all the 9 worlds and whose roots delve deep into the springs of fate and knowledge. Yggdrasil is not just a tree. It is the scaffolding of the universe, the living, breathing structure that holds all of reality together. The 9 worlds are nestled within its branches and roots. There is Asgard, the high home of the Aesir gods, a celestial fortress of golden halls and green fields, connected to the world of mortals by the shimmering rainbow bridge, the Bifrost. There is Midgard, Middle Earth, the world of humanity, a realm surrounded by a vast ocean, in which lurks the monstrous world serpent, Jörmungandr, a child of Loki who is so large he encircles the entire world and bites his own tail. There is Jotunheim, the land of the giants, a wild, mountainous place of ice and rock, a realm of chaos and constant threat to the gods. There is also Vanaheim, the home of the Vanir gods, a second family of deities associated with fertility, wisdom, and nature. Other worlds include Alfheim, the land of the light elves, Svartalfheim, the subterranean realm of the dwarves, the master craftsmen who forge the gods' greatest treasures, Niflheim, the primordial world of ice and mist, and Muspelheim, the world of fire, ruled by the giant Surtur. And finally, there is Helheim, the realm of the dead, a cold and gloomy place presided over by the goddess Hel. The roots of Yggdrasil are as important as its branches. One root reaches into Asgard, another into Jotunheim, and the third into Niflheim. At the base of these roots are 3 sacred wells: the Well of Urd, where the Norns, the fates of Norse mythology, weave the destiny of all beings. Mimir's well, the source of all wisdom, and Vergelmir, the bubbling, boiling spring from which all rivers flow. Yggdrasil is a dynamic and living cosmos. A serpent named Nidhugger gnaws at its roots, threatening to destroy it. An eagle sits in its highest branches, and a squirrel named Ratatoska scurries up and down the trunk, carrying insults between the eagle and the serpent. The tree suffers, it groans, but it endures. It is a powerful symbol of the interconnectedness of all things, life and death, creation and destruction, gods and mortals. It is the universe as a single, great, living organism, constantly under threat but always, somehow, holding together. The Norse conception of fate, or word, is one of the most powerful and pervasive themes in their mythology. It is not a simple idea of predestination, but a complex, active force that shapes the lives of both gods and mortals. Wyrd is not a written plan. It is a tapestry, constantly being woven by the three Norns, the female figures of destiny who reside at the Well of Urd, at the base of the World Tree. The Norns, Urd, what once was, Verdandi, what is coming into being, and Skuld, what shall be, are not subject to the will of the gods. Even Odin cannot alter the threads they weave. They represent a power older and more fundamental than the gods themselves. They carve the runes of fate onto the trunk of Yggdrasil, and their decisions are final. This belief in an inescapable destiny did not lead to a sense of helpless fatalism among the Vikings. On the contrary, it fueled a philosophy of heroic courage. Since the ultimate outcome of one's life was already determined, what mattered was not whether you won or lost, but how you faced your fate. A man could not choose when he would die, but he could choose to die bravely. A warrior's greatest ambition was to earn a reputation for courage, honor, and loyalty, so that his name would live on in the sagas and poems long after he was gone. This is the heroic ideal of the Viking Age: to face one's destiny with unflinching courage, to fight against impossible odds, and to leave behind a story worth telling. The sagas are filled with heroes who know they are fated to die, but who go to their deaths with a defiant laugh or a final, biting insult. They do not beg for mercy or try to escape their doom. They embrace it. This is not pessimism. It is a form of profound existential courage. Even the gods are bound by fate. Odin knows that he is destined to be swallowed by the wolf Fenrir at Ragnarok. Thor knows he will kill the world serpent, but will be killed by its venom in turn. Yet, they do not hide from their fate. They prepare for it. They gather their forces, and they resolve to face the end with as much courage as they can muster. The concept of Wyrd gives the Norse myths their tragic grandeur. It is a worldview that acknowledges the harsh realities of life and the inevitability of death, but which finds meaning and honor not in escaping fate, but in meeting it head-on, with a sword in hand and a song on one's lips. The climax of Norse mythology is not a story of eternal victory, but of epic cosmic destruction. It is Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods, a final cataclysmic battle that will consume the gods, the giants, and the very fabric of the universe. It is not a story of hope, but of a fate that has been prophesied and cannot be avoided. The events leading to Ragnarok begin with the death of Balder, the most beloved of the gods, engineered by the trickster Loki. This act breaks the bonds of kinship among the gods and unleashes a chain reaction of chaos. The world will be plunged into the Thimble Winter, 3 successive winters with no summer in between. The sun and moon will be devoured by the great wolves Skirl and Hati, and the world will be cast into darkness. The bonds that hold society together will break. Brothers will kill brothers, and all oaths will be forsaken. Then, the final cataclysm will begin. The world tree, Yggdrasil, will tremble. The world serpent, Jörmungandr, will rise from the sea, thrashing and spewing venom, causing a great flood. The wolf Fenrir, long bound by the gods, will break his chains, his gaping jaws stretching from earth to sky. From the realm of fire, Muspelheim, the giant Surtur will advance with a sword brighter than the sun, leading an army of fire giants. And from the land of the dead, a ship made from the fingernails and toenails of the dead, Naglfar, will set sail, captained by Loki himself, who has also broken free from his bondage. The gods will prepare for the final battle. Heimdall, the watchman, will sound the Gjallarhorn, its blast echoing throughout the 9 worlds. Odin will lead the Einherjar, the host of slain warriors, out of Valhalla and onto the battlefield of Vigrid. The final desperate struggle between the forces of order and chaos will commence. The gods will fight with all their might, but their doom is sealed. Odin will be swallowed whole by Fenrir. Thor will slay the world serpent, but he will be poisoned by its venom and will take only 9 steps before falling dead. The god Freyr will be killed by Surtur. The god Tyr and the Hound of Hell, Garma, will kill each other. Loki and Heimdall will also meet their mutual doom. In the end, Surtur will set the world ablaze with his fiery sword. The earth will sink into the sea, and the stars will vanish from the sky. There will be nothing but smoke, flame, and the silent, empty void. But Ragnarok is not the absolute end. Out of the destruction, a new world will emerge. The earth will rise again from the sea, green and beautiful. A new sun, the daughter of the old one, will light the sky. A handful of gods will survive, including Balder, who will return from the dead. And 2 human beings, Leif and Leifthrazir, who hid within the wood of Yggdrasil, will emerge to repopulate the new earth. It is a cycle of destruction and rebirth, a story of profound pessimism and a glimmer of hope. It is a myth that acknowledges that even the gods are mortal, that all worlds must end, but that even in the darkest of ashes, the seed of a new beginning can be found. The transition from the Old Norse faith to Christianity was one of the most significant and transformative periods in Scandinavian history. It was not a swift or peaceful process, but a long, often violent struggle that lasted for centuries, pitting kings against chieftains, tradition against modernity, and Odin against the White Christ. The first encounters with Christianity came through Viking raids and trade. Norsemen who travelled to Christian lands like England, Francia, and the Byzantine Empire were exposed to the new faith. Some were baptized as a political necessity or for economic advantage, but often these early conversions were superficial. A Viking might accept Christ, but continue to worship Thor and Odin in private. The real push for conversion came from the top down. Ambitious Scandinavian kings, seeking to consolidate their power and create unified European-style monarchies, saw Christianity as a powerful tool. The church offered a hierarchical structure, a literate administration, and a divine justification for kingship that the old pagan faith lacked. Kings like Harald Bluetooth of Denmark and Olaf Tryggvason of Norway became zealous converts and used all means necessary, including force, to impose the new religion on their subjects. The process was met with fierce resistance. Many local chieftains and free farmers clung to the old ways, seeing Christianity as a foreign faith that threatened their traditions, their independence, and their worldview. The sagas are filled with stories of this conflict, of pagan temples being burned, of idols being smashed, and of those who refused to convert being exiled or executed. It was a culture war, fought not just with swords, but with symbols and ideas. For a time, the two faiths coexisted in a fascinating syncretic blend. Carved runestones from this period often feature both Christian crosses and Norse mythological motifs, like Thor's hammer. A warrior might be buried with both a cross and his sword, hedging his bets for the afterlife. But gradually, the new faith prevailed. The church established dioceses, built cathedrals, and created a network of priests and monks who slowly replaced the old pagan ritual leaders. The worship of the old gods was driven underground, eventually fading into folklore and myth. By the 12th century, Scandinavia had become a fully integrated part of Christian Europe. The conversion marked the end of an era. The warrior ethos of Valhalla was replaced by the Christian virtues of humility and mercy. The roving, raiding spirit of the Viking was tamed and channeled into the feudal structures of the medieval world. The old gods were defeated, not in a great battle like Ragnarok, but by the slow, inexorable tide of history. But they were never completely forgotten. Their stories were written down by Christian scholars like Snorri Sturluson in Iceland, who preserved the myths and legends of his ancestors, ensuring that the voices of Odin, Thor, and Loki would never be entirely silenced.